all we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
All men are created equal. All men are created equal. It's the lofty and revolutionary ideal at America's core. Yet it was written at a time when some inhabitants were held in bondage, and others were being dispossessed of their lands. How did American society justify unequal treatment based on skin color and national origins? How did it reconcile that contradiction? America created a story of race.
We have the idea that it's somewhere written in stone that there are these fundamental differences between human beings. We don't realize that race is an idea that evolves over time, that it has a history.
Because if you know the history of the whole concept of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick, and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland. Highlanders and Lowlanders just fought the hell out of each other. So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured, like many poor Europeans, for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture, and then they would be free labor, technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans, who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together, more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. The whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't want to kill them all. You had to do the work yourself. You had to build your own levee, build your own house. No. Pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land. Just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination. But we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the west. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly.
People of African descent go back hundreds of years in Mexico, but as a group, Afro-Mexicans are largely invisible. A 2015 census is changing that. CCTV's Frank Contreras has insight from Mexico's southern state of Oaxaca.
Among Afro-Mexican communities here on the Pacific coast of Mexico's Oaxaca state, this dance is symbolic. Locals say the devils represent the growing power of African descendants in this part of Latin America. It's a history that's beginning to gain global attention.
The presence of Africa here in Oaxaca state is one of the lesser-known aspects of the vast cultural diversity in this region, one of the most culturally diverse in all of Latin America.
Last year, for the first time, the government conducted an interim census asking Mexicans, based on your culture, history, and traditions, do you consider yourself black, meaning Afro-Mexican or Afro-descendant? And nearly 1.4 million people responded, yes. Afro-Mexican communities exist here in Oaxaca state's Costa Chica region, the neighboring state of Guerrero, and Veracruz state, among others. An Afro-Mexican leader from Pinotepa Nacional says, as a nation, Mexico is much more than just a mixture of Spanish and indigenous people.
We believe that the whole world should know that in the colonial era, Mexico was an entry point for African slaves. Our ancestors were forcibly brought here under slavery.
But images of African descendants in Mexico rarely appear in public. The exception is this famous comic book character, Memín Penguin, which was created in the 1940s. Nicomedes Ramirez and her cousin, Castula Silva, grew up in these impoverished coastal communities. Ramirez says over the years, politicians have come with their electioneer promises to end poverty.
They told us they would help, and they would bring us basic things we were lacking. All we had to do was ask, but so far, they have done nothing for us.
I never went to school because when I was a girl, there was no school here. We had to go to another community, and my parents, may they rest in peace, told me I could not go, so I never studied.
Afro-Mexican communities are almost completely separated from the rest of Mexico, and very few outsiders ever come here for a first-hand look at their most well-known traditions, like this dance known as a chilena, or this one depicting a charging bull. Mexico's national constitution is the only one in Latin America that does not specifically mention the existence of citizens of African descent. Afro-Mexican authorities say they're planning to take legal action and change the constitution so that it includes them.
By having no presence in the Mexican Constitution, there is no public policy that protects our rights and necessities. We, as Afro-Mexicans, like many indigenous Mexicans, live in regions of extreme marginalization.
Constitutional recognition would finally give them access to medical services, educational grants, and social security benefits. For now, Afro-Mexicans, whose descendants came from places like Kenya, the Congo, and later the Caribbean, still do not enjoy these basic rights. Frank Contreras, CCTV, on the Costa Chica in Mexico's southern state of Oaxaca.